So now we move on to a structure that may look familiar for us since we already saw the d5 pawn change, but and actually this is considered to be the spine of this King's Indian structure, but it's different in many ways. This is the so-called complex King's Indian, and nowadays I've seen it a lot in many games. It's very flexible in sort of in many positions, and you have to be aware of what to do in this position because obvious decisions like for example taking on d4 or black taking on d4 could lead to very dramatic changes in the position. So there are basically four main things that actually can happen in this situation. One of them we already know, which is if white decides to play d5 in this position, and of course here two things can happen. One is black taking on d5, where we take with the c pawn. This is a fight that we saw previously. The other decision is where they play c5, the so-called Benoni structure, and the decisions that are more related to actually this type of structure is the very aggressive one, c5, challenging completely the center. And the other two options is one where white takes on e4, and we get this structure with a pawn on c6, or sometimes it's actually white with a pawn c4 and a pawn c5. It could work both ways, but the idea is that the d-file gets opened, and one side maybe gets control over the d-file, but the other side get this important square on d4. And the last option is when it's black actually who takes on d4, and we get a structure where both pawns are trade off, and the d-file gets open, and the d6 gets vulnerable. That will be one of the most complex one to see in action, because of the of how white could manage whether to attack on the king side if he has to put pressure on d6, and also all the maneuvers that involves black position, and also to review the d5 pawn break from black in that structure. So that will be it for the introduction. Really, there are only like three ideas that kind of occur in this position, but they are very complex. There are many maneuvers, very timing, a lot of timing for both sides, and that's what we'll be looking at the next games. So now we're gonna look at the first idea that can occur in this type of structure, and is the pawn break on c5. So we're going to review the game of Dragan Paunovic against Carlos Matamoros. The game started playing knight f3, knight f6, c4, g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2. We're in an English opening, but it is one very flexible, and it actually transposes into Catalan. Castles, knight bd7, queen c2, e5. Trying to play the King's Indian. Knight d7 is not the only way to develop. I also have seen moves like knight c6, or play e6 and then later knight c6. Many options here. There are some others with c5, for example, followed by knight by something like knight c6 and knight f5. Many things have been tried in this position. Knight b7 is a very common one. Queen c2, e5, rook d1, rook e8, e4, c6, and now we get the structure that we want to review. this is one of the most complex ones. You see, as I mentioned, there are not so many options here. White, of course, maybe could think about playing something like d5 in this position. But instead of that, they decide to keep the tension a little bit more, and they played knight c3. Queen c7 was played here, h3, b5, and now we get into the critical position. White here plays c5, and this is a move that is very strong, but in order to make this happen, you have to calculate things that work in your way, because things are going to happen really quickly. Many things will be changed, and at the end you will be sacrificing a pawn, but you need to make sure that there will be compensation in order for the pawn that you will be giving. Black maybe can take here on e4, but after pawn takes, the queen will be in trouble because it will be followed up by rook takes. So the more challenging option here is to take on c5 first, which after this, of course, if you take here on c5, you will simply lose a pawn. The challenging move will be the move pawn takes on e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes e5. And if you have nothing here to prove that your position is right, you will simply be a pawn down. That's why it's very important for you to make sure that all your pieces will work together after this type of sacrifice. And to look just how difficult this position could be, I will show you a line where a simple move, a move that actually looks very according to what you just did, could lose immediately. And for example, a move here like f4 could get white into a lot of trouble. So let's say something like queen h5, and you keep pushing with e5. So it seems like white is winning tempos. Actually, it looks really great. If black has nothing here, you're not only threatening to take on f6, but also you're looking forward to play bishop takes on c6, threatening both rooks, or prepare it first by playing g4 and then bishop takes g6. So it looks a very promising position, but since this position is very tactical, you miss one thing and you lose on the spot. And here there is a very strong move, bishop takes h3, and now white has to accept the challenge and take on f6, because otherwise black will be just 2 pawns up with a very strong position and not any compensation from white side. So if they take now, bishop takes f6, and after bishop takes h3 and queen takes h3, the pawn on g3 will be in a lot of trouble, and also moves like bishop d4 will come in the way, and the queenside pawns now start to look more relevant. So it's very, very easy to lose this type of position if you don't play accordingly. The correct move here is not to play f4 and not just simply develop a piece. The best move here is to play bishop f4, and here now it will be very hard for black to try to keep the pawn or to get any counterplay. If they, for example, play just simply queen e7, simple move, bishop d6, queen e6 and bishop c5 will get the pawn back, and a lot of control over the center grants white a very good advantage. And if they play something like queen d6, queen e6, avoiding bishop d6, but now they will run out into rook d6, and after queen c4, bishop f1, queen b4, after the white can play now rook takes rook takes on c6, and they will have a very good position, threatening to take on b5. Also, they might be threats of taking on f6 and playing knight d5. There are many things. White has the pieces better placed than black, so the only move here to fight is queen h5. But now e5 is a good move. And from here now it's very hard for black to play. If they play knight d7, simply bishop takes c6, and there's no longer a counterplay of taking the pawn on h3. So knight d5 was played, trying to give up the pawn in order to try to develop their pieces. But after knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes d5, bishop h3, and bishop takes a8, black loses an exchange. And after queen e4, white also manages to take care over the light squares, so there will be no mating ideas for black. So as you can see, well, actually the game continued, but it was very easy for white to play this position. The important thing is to remind that certain things has to be in the position in order to develop this type of sacrifice. And of course here a move like b5 is not so good because it allows c5. But some other factors also come into play. Like for example, here after pawn takes, it's important that black doesn't have the move knight g5, so the pawn h3 is here. And after all the traits, it's very important for white that after the move bishop f4, they have the bishop well placed in order to threat the queen side. So many things has to come into play. That's why it's very important for you to calculate if c5 actually works, because if you see that this type of things doesn't work for you in this structure, it may be a better option just to think about playing d5, or thinking maybe that it's a favorable position to trade on e5. We're gonna look at another example of how this position can be played, and we're gonna see at the game of Yuri Aberbach against Abramovic, and I'm gonna start by the move e4. So you can see that this type of structure not only arises out of just queen pawn openings, knight f6, castle, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop e3. Now we get the very classic Spanish opening, d6, c3, trying to play d4, castles, h3, avoiding bishop h4, and here black plays knight b8, very popular move, trying to bring the bishop to b7, and allows black to play c5 at some point. So white plays d4, challenges the center, knight b d7, and here white plays c4. Maybe it's not so common nowadays, and people tends to play knight b d2 in these positions, or just a4. But okay, c4 was playing this position, c6, and now we have sort of the same position as we have in the last game. Here, of course, there are some sort of different arrangement on the pieces, but there is they at least accomplished one of the requirements, that the pawn is on h3, so knight g5 doesn't work. And also they are threatening some other stuff. When we have the bishop on g2, of course we had pressure over the pawn on c6, but with the bishop on b3, our attention would not look into the queen side, but rather on the king side. So c5 was played, d takes c5, d takes c5, knight e8 was played, and now e6. So white makes sure that he will keep the initiative after they sacrifice the pawn. F takes, bishop takes, king h8, knight c3, they simply develop, knight c7, bishop f5, and white, by doing all this c5 strategy, they managed to put their pieces in the king side, so now all of them are looking very strong. And you can compare now with the black pieces, who they are like cramped in the 7 and 8 rank. They still need to manage to get their position together. They tried by playing c4 and tried to give some space to their pieces, but after bishop f4, knight e6, and bishop g3, it doesn't matter that black now has the square on d3. All of white pieces are working now very well together. White can even think about translating the rook to the third rank. And also now there are threats of playing things like queen h5 or just a5 and playing queen h5. Many ways to improve here white's position. If I was played, trying to defend also the square of f6, rook d8, and now bishop takes e7, king takes and queen h5, and the attack is just too strong. King g8, knight f5, bishop f8, queen g6, now threatening e6 or knight h6. So king h8 was played, knight e4, bringing more pieces to the king side, knight e6, trying to avoid knight g5, but unfortunately knight f6 also exists in this position, and after knight takes, pawn takes, and rook e7, rook e4, transposing now the rook into the 4th rank, and now threatening to play rook h4. Nothing else to do here for black. They try knight f4, but after rook takes, bishop takes, and rook takes f5, is still the threat of playing rook h5 is in the position, and black simply had to resign in this position. So very important, once again, make the recap. C5 only works when really things go in your way. Make sure at least that your pawn is on h3 so you avoid the knight jumping to g5. And also when you sacrifice this pawn, make sure that after this you will have the initiative, because otherwise black will consolidate the pawn and they will be a pawn up. So now we're gonna review the next situation that can happen when you have the complex king's Indian structure, and it's when you take one of the sides decides to take on e5. So we're gonna look at the game of Bojan Kurajika against Norman Littlewood. They start by playing e4, c5, knight f3, d6, c3, e5, bishop b5 check, bishop d7, bishop takes, knight takes, castles, knight gf6. This opening in general is not considered very good for black, playing just e5 so straightforward, basically because of what is going to happen now. d4, bishop e7, and now here white can decide to take on e5 immediately. So now after pawn takes, and queen e2, we get the idea. One of the situations that can happen when you get the complex King's Indian structure. And here the idea is very basic. The side that has these two pawns here, it will try to control the d file. In most situations, they will actually get this position by already controlling this file. But the main problem that this site is facing is the fact that they don't have much control over these two squares. And even if they have the control over the d file, they will anyway have to turn their attention in order to control this square, because they are too strong, too strong outputs, with the knight on d4, simply stopping all the actions of the rooks on the d file, and with the knight on f5 having a lot of attacking ideas on the king side. So the fight will be around those two things. Black plays here h6, which probably is not optimal. Maybe better was just to castle and maybe play something like g6 later, or playing queen something like queen c7, rook a d8, and if white tries knight h4, knight f4, playing g6. And if they try to go to d5, try to prepare themselves in order to trade on d5 and try to blockade this pawn. But h6 doesn't look according to this position. Knight bd2 was played, queen c7, and now knight c4. You see how white is now maneuvering their knight in order to control these two very important outposts. b5 was played. Maybe black was thinking that they were gaining some tempos, but in fact it was white who's developing very nicely here. Queen c6, knight d5, and bishop d6 was played. If black decides to take here after pawn takes, queen takes, there is queen b5, and even though they are trading one central pawn for one on outside, the fact that black is getting 3 Iceland is even more important. So bishop d6 was played, rook d1, cementing the knight on d5, c4, and now knight h4. Since black didn't play g6, now they can allow themselves to try to bring a piece to the important outpost on f4, on f5. g6 was played, and you see now h6 is very weak, and the knight on h4 has done a very excellent work provoking g6. Knight f3, queen f3, bishop e7, and now knight takes c7. It seems like they are trading actually a very bad bishop, but usually these bad bishops are defending very strong pawns and pieces. So trades one of the bishops, king takes e7, b3, now challenging on the queen side, and also bringing the bishop to the game. So knight c5, bishop a3, rook c8, queen g3, queen c7, b takes e4, b takes e4, and rook b1. White is simply bringing pieces into the game. Rook hd8 and queen e3, reminding black that they have a weakness on h6. So rook takes d1, rook takes d1, queen c6. They just give away the pawn, trying to get some counterplay in the middle of the board after queen takes e4. But after knight f3, is obvious now that white has the activity in this position, and also the upper hand, because after they take the pawn on e4, again, they may have may have conceded his central pawn, but it was a goal for white to open the center since the king is in the middle. So queen c2 was played, rook e1, queen c3, rook e5, queen d7, and queen f4. There is no checkmate. On the background, there is always rook e1 or knight d1. So white is not in trouble. Queen takes a3, queen takes f6, knight d3. But after queen takes a7, the black is under complete attack. And after knight d4, black decides to resign in this position. So if you're getting into this type of structure, make sure that you at least will have some control over these squares. Prepare yourself, because it's almost impossible to stop the other side to post one of their knights either on f4, on f5 or on d5, or if you're playing the other way around on d4 and on f4. Try to prepare yourself when one of these moves happened. Maybe to accept the knight on d5 and try to put some blockade on d6. Try to play g6 so you can stop the knight coming to f5. Try to prepare yourself. And also, it's not all about preparation. There is something else that the other side can actually try in order to fight against this type of structure, and is to try to play well, not exactly b5, but the move that they want to achieve is to play c4, and after that try also to approach the one outpost for the knight, which will be the square on d3, and that's what we're gonna look in the next game, which is Smyslov against Jansa Vlastimil. This is actually a very famous game. Knight f3, knight f6, d4. We get now into a more common King's Indian. h6, bishop h4, e5. Now is white who trades on e5. Castles, c6, and we get a very similar structure. Although in this position the pawn is on e3, it's actually a more favorable structure for white, because now they control both squares. And they don't have as many weaknesses. So queen c2 was played, queen e7, knight d2, rook e8, rook a d1. White wants to still keep some ideas of playing f4 at some point, so that's why the rook on f1 doesn't move. Knight f8, knight d4, g5, and they trade the knight. Knights are very strong in this position. It's kind of close, and black white wants to avoid knight from jumping into important squares. So knight f6, knight f6 was played, queen f6, bishop g3, queen g6, knight e4. You don't want to trade queens yet. f5, knight d6, rook e7, and you see now white is putting all the effort to try to control the d6 square. And black on the other side is trying to attack, because White is getting so much control in the center, and they can't challenge actually this control. So they try to bring White's attention to the other wing of the board. So f4 now it's played. That's why it's important to keep the rook on f1. So you always have f4 and your bishop don't get trapped on h2. Pawn takes e4, bishop h4, rook c7, knight takes c8, knight takes c8, and now c5. White is always taking some look over the square on d6, king h6, rook d6, and now black is really into a lot of pressure. After rook d7, rook takes, king h8, and b4. The position is unsustainable for black, and actually lose in a couple moves. So rook d7, rook takes, bishop takes, queen a4, a lot of control. d6 knight is in there, a lot of trouble, and there are many weaknesses that white can exploit. Black really tried to resist, but there is not much they can do. They tried to play d3, at least trying to queen a pawn, but after h3, queen h4, queen d3, the pawn will fall. That was the last resource from black to resist, and now there is really no hope for black. And here in this position, they resign, since the pawn on c6 will fall anyways. So when you're playing against this structure, of course, if you can keep your pawn on e3, it will be very great. It will be great. But the main strategy that I want to show here is the fact that you have to control the square on d6 if you want to face this structure with e5 and c6. So now we're gonna look at the last situation that can happen when you have this structure, and is when black decides to take on d4 by themselves. So we're gonna look at the first game, Polevlasky against Abramovic. They started playing d4, and once again a very standard king's Indian. So queen c2, e5, rook e1, knight c3, c6, once again the structure, and then e4. So we get this structure with the bishop on g2, kind of similar to the first games that we saw, where white actually manages to play c5. But of course here they don't play queen c7 and b5. They don't want to allow this kind of stuff, and instead Polevlasky bring here the idea of taking on d4 immediately. Of course this type of move is very controversial in that time, because the pawn on d6 looks very weak. You're basically opening the d file, and it's like you're saying, please attack me on d6. But black really has here many resources to prove that the d6 pawn would not be so weak as many people thought. And there are actually two pawn breaks that you might want to get in mind when you're playing this position. The first one is to play f5 in some positions, so you can bring the bishop to f5, and also try to open files to both of diagonals for both of your bishops. And there is a second pawn break, and probably the more ideal one, but also one of the hardest to do, is to play d5 in some positions, where you get rid of the pawn on d6, and at the same time you're also opening diagonals and files for your pieces. The first one is going to be the pawn on f5, which since is the easiest one to get. Queen e7 was played here, h3, knight c5. This is a very important move, very common. You have to keep pressure over e4, and try to keep white to keep pieces defending this pawn. So you always going to have like a counterplay against e4, since your pawn on d6 will always be under pressure. So white here tries to eliminate all of this pressure by playing f3 immediately. but at the same time they cut away the activity of the bishop on g2. So a5, very important move. Your knight is very strong on c5. You don't want white to push them away. g4. This was kind of like a strange move. Maybe white is trying to play f4 and f5 at some point. But it's not so clear if they want to really do that. That's why actually black here plays simply knight d7, rook b1, knight e5, inviting in some way white to play a move like f4. But of course white resists. They don't play it immediately. They play b3, and now comes the move that I was mentioning, f5. Very good move. Black pieces are very well arranged, and they can allow to even to sacrifice this pawn in order to open files and to their pieces. The king is not so secure, and actually is the security of this king and all of the dark squares that are around this king that allows this type of moves. So e takes e5 was played, g takes e5, pawn takes e5, and now very good move, knight e to d3. So now if rook takes e3 as it happened in the game, simply knight takes, queen takes, and queen e1 check. c5 now c5 is a threat, of course, and also the bishop is coming to e1 to e5. So many threats are coming. Bishop f1 was played, queen g3, king h1, and now simply rook e1. And they have enough pieces to attack the king basically. The bishop on g7 is always threatening to play things like bishop e4 or to grab the knight on d4. And the combination with the rook and the queen is very strong. So white tried to defend by playing bishop e3, but after queen h3, king g1, queen g3 check, king h1, queen h4, and rook takes e3, white positions collapses immediately after king takes and bishop takes d4, and black won in a few moves. Here after queen g5 they resign. There's really no defense against bishop f5, and also the knight on c3 is hanging. So f5, very strong move, trying to exploit all the files that you can get, also trying to exploit the weakness of the king on g1. Look that there is a lot of dark squares weakened in this position, and white still hasn't finished their development. Always remember that the bishop on c8 doesn't really need to be developed in a specific place. He's doing a great job there, always threatening to get sacrifice on h3 or to get some activity later on. And with moves like f5 you simply liberate your position. So always keep that in mind. It's a very important pawn break that you must keep, that you have to keep in mind in order to play it in your games. And the next one is the pawn break on d5, which is difficult to get, but when you get it, you simply liberate all of your pieces. So we have the game of Gustafsson against Kramik, and d4 was played, knight f6, c4, g6, once again King's Indian defense, bishop e3, c6, castles, and after pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, rook e8. Blacks put pressure over e4. White decides to defend by playing f3, but after playing f3, of course, they leave the bishop with no defense, and Kramik here approaches this opportunity and plays d5 immediately. Pawn takes d5 was played, and now knight takes d5, not taking with the pawn, but instead taking with the knight. So you're putting pressure over the bishop on e3 immediately. Knight takes d5 was played, c takes d5, rook c1, and now a5 was played. Queen b3, and now simply a4. It's still trying to approach the fact that there is a pin on this file. Queen takes d5 was played, queen takes, rook takes, and now a3. Black is basically trying to open this diagonal, and at the same time, if white decides to trade on a3, their rook will get active immediately by taking the pawn. So Gustafsson's played b3, knight c6 was played, pawn, knight c2, and after rook takes e3, knight takes a knight b4. You can see the strain of this bishop is too much. It's very powerful. The pawn on a3 now is threatening to queen at any point. So white decides to play rook c4. So now after knight takes rook f4 is possible, but unfortunately the bishop on d4 is just too strong. And after knight b4, simple move, a2, rook takes, king g7, rook c1, and now after knight d5, the knight on e3 will fall, and there's nothing the black can do that white can do to stop the a2 pawn for queening. So the game was won very easily, but still the important thing to remember here is to always keep in mind both pawn breaks. d5 is a little is more difficult to get, especially if you're playing the last position. And ideally you will play a5 in order to bring your bishop on c8 into the game, and also to create some attacking chances on the king side.